The research is absolutely fundamental to all the work that I do on law. I use the work of people such as Mike Joy on water quality standards, Tim Naish on Antarctic ice loss and what that's going to do to sea level rise. If we don't know what's happening on the ground, I don't know whether our laws are working in the right way. I don't know whether our laws are fit for purpose. So if I want to look at an environmental problem, that might have been, someone else might have identified a problem, and I go, oh, is that something we can make better with changing a law? Is that something we can make better by taking a case to get a judge to change the law? If we change the way we even see the environment, if we start seeing ourselves as part of an ecosystem, then we depend on the environment to survive. Changing perspectives, moving from rights to responsibilities, could change that whole focus much more easily than just passing a rule. So can the EQC compensate people for, say, great sea level rise, flooding from sea level rise? And you find actually no, it doesn't come within the definition of flood. Because a flood under the EQC scheme and insurance law is sudden events, you know, just like you would get a deluge, same rain today and tomorrow, and the drain gets blocked and something gets flooded. That's the kind of flood that's covered. Or a storm surge, a one-off, you know, but not gradual sea level rise. And you can't use some of the other schemes in terms of payouts for cliff instability. You can't use those to do it in advance of it actually being really dangerous. So the EQC scheme is not fit for climate change purpose. And so you think about first, what is litigation about these climate change hazards all about? And what's it going to look like? And of course it's going to be basics. Someone's going to suffer some damage and they're going to look around for someone to blame. People are going to be desperate and upset and not prepared. What does the council do when it thinks it knows what it needs for the long term, and people now don't want it for their short term and their enjoyment? And they say, it's my property, why should I have to do this for the good, say, of a community benefit in 50 years' time? And the council has to make decisions for 100 years. Part of research involves just keeping up with the science. I put in a proposal for doing some work on climate adaptation law. And it was in response to an insurance stakeholder workshop that suggested that we needed a bunch of research done in this area on relation to the law on climate adaptation. And particularly what happens when insurance is no longer able to be got for housing in the face of sea level rise. So the Haumoana 21, there you could say that's the classic example of what will happen if insurance retreats, is house values go down and they either move or they just live there until they get washed out.
Yeah.
If they want to sell, well, they sell for less. They lose their insurance. So if you lose your insurance, you can't usually get a mortgage from the bank. So you can only sell your house to someone who doesn't need a mortgage. Some of those properties used to go, I gather, for like $500,000 or $600,000. Recently sold for less than $100,000.
Wow.
I know of one. Well, here at least one, but I don't know whether it's more than that. But sold for like $60,000 to $100,000 to people who want to surf.
Yeah, and so, then it's just offloading the problem onto new homeowners.
Well, except I think if you buy it for only 60 or 100, you probably you don't feel so bad as if you bought it for 500.
Yeah.
You know. But those values have dropped because they lost insurance, and maybe other things, and also the sea's lapping at their front door. Huge issues, and it's happening now. There are coastal communities around the country, in all areas of the country actually. You can think of all coasts, all coastlines, where there are already communities facing the inundation and having, the fronts of properties washed out. And councils are trying to decide now what to do about it. Yeah. Should they have been allowing these houses in the first place? Should they have been putting up seawalls? All of those kind of questions. The law has some things to say about that, but not everybody, and certainly not all councils, might have thought about it because they're busy dealing with their day-to-day business, and it's really hard to look at, what is climate change going to do to us and what might we need to be doing by way of adaptation. You know, on top of their everyday, day-to-day, like all your wastewater treatment and all of the other things that councils have to be, you know, worrying about. So the oldest photo here would be me in Ngāti Poneke. And I do still have the piu-piu, the poi, and the outfit, everything. So you wanted a photo of me at university. Here's one of me at Yale. Okay. Same glasses in here when I did my master's degree. And all tied back, looking a little bit more professional for the University Challenge team. Sometime in the 80s, I can't remember which year it was. I'd have to go back and think about it. Why did I even do law in the first place? That was simply a suggestion from my father. I'd finished high school, was looking at enrollment for uni. I have all these little booklets, and it's like, I think I was sitting at the dining room table, and it's like, what do I do? He goes, oh, you should try law. And it was just a comment from off the side. He would never have suggested it if I hadn't asked. That was his philosophy. He had this thing of children, you take no credit, take no blame. You don't tell people what to do, never give them advice unless they actually ask you. And that's it, sits for 8 hours. That one. There's something about the actual, like the application of law to facts. I mean, if you're helping people, you actually feel good about doing it. If I had been able to just apply law to facts, maybe win things, it feels great, right? And you can see why people do it. If I had been doing environment and working for what I might have called the bad guy, and in the end, especially over your lifetime, you see bad environmental effects, then I really would have questioned it. Regional councils determine, and they have the responsibility for water, both the take, the quality, and then the discharge. Many catchments are already over-allocated. Under the RMA, councils are not allowed to charge a royalty for the water, not allowed to charge for the water itself. They're only allowed to charge administrative costs, like for the permitting process and for the supply. We're going to need different thinking about this, different ways of relating to the environment, but I also think we're still going to need all that protest. Why are they going to get these things through? They're going to get these things through if people demand them. Right? And people have to be much more vocal about what's necessary, or else we're not going to get any of them. The politicians want to be re-elected. Their jobs depend on doing what people want them to do.
It seems like it is easy to fix it, just no one wants to do it.
Exactly. No, there are lots, nearly all of this, you'll see nearly all this area, there are easy fixes, not easy, but we're clear, well-known fixes for the southern seabirds, for the dolphins, you know, for the fish. People just don't want to do it.
And so we're a pressure group, advocacy group on the councils and the public to look after our river better. Down the main road of Upper Hutt, which is Ferguson Drive, there's a little side street called Refreshment Place because there was a Coca-Cola bottling plant in there. Now someone has bought that property and they want to use the consent. It seems that the consent is associated with the property, and a bottling company has bought it, has got the consent and intends to use that consent to bottle water.
So at the moment, we were just talking about in class, at the moment there's certainly not a national standard and an agreed way to reduce intake. So at the moment, it's not like fishing quota. Fishing quotas, you get percentages of a quota. So if the government reduces the overall take, you still have your 10% or your 2%.
Oh, right, which would diminish if the overall take diminishes.
Exactly, if the
but
overall
it's expressed
quota.
in percentage terms. Oh, that's a good idea.
Which makes sense, whereas water's not. One of the attractions for these companies to come in is that we don't charge for the water itself. A couple of years ago, we went from about 40 million litres exported to like 120 million litres of water exported. It's a huge increase. The difficulty with it is, of course, the water that's being exported is the pristine water. I'm on the banks of Te Awa Tupua, which is the name that's been given to the Whanganui River. which flows, from the mountains up in the centre of the North Island, all the way down through the national parks, through farmland, and comes out and then through the city, Whanganui, and comes out to the ocean. The river's been given its own name because it's been made a legal person. You might wonder, what's a legal person? How's that different from a normal person? That's simply a status that law gives it, like a company has been given the status of a person, so it can hold property and can sign contracts, in its own name. Obviously the river's not out there wielding a pen and signing contracts, but it has a set of guardians, and in order to be, who do all that signing and things for it, but in order to be a legal person, you give it a name, just like you would give a baby a name. Climate change adds a whole new layer of guardianship responsibilities for this river, and that will be really interesting to see how either the guardians or the councils are going to be sorting out what to do about climate change, because the biggest thing that climate has an impact on was there's temperature and there's water. So the government right now is considering what to do in relation to the treatment of water, fresh water around New Zealand, in all the rivers, not just Te Awa Tupua. Whenever humans are affected by an environmental issue, you get a lot more traction. So a human right to a healthy environment, or where people are getting sick from water, as they are in Canterbury particularly, where people are getting sick, you're going to get a lot more attention to these issues. And then people might agree that we need a body to look after the interests of the water that therefore looks after the interests of the people. So it really is a cycle. Here's the great thing though, there are lots and lots of people doing stuff, lots of people fighting, for a better protection of our environment, and they're not doing it for themselves, they're doing it because they think it's right. There's the interesting thing. They're not just doing it say for a job, they're doing it because they genuinely think we have to do that for the sake of humanity.
So it all starts here at Wenukura Marae, because this is where Mum was raised as a baby. Mum would be 100 this year if she was still alive, and Mum and Dad lived here, and Dad would be 110 if he were alive. So they raised half of our family here. And this marae was so important because of its proximity to the river and to the sea and the bush. I always remember the stories from Mum around how they always had plenty to eat here, because there was always plenty of kai from the river, from the sea, from their gardens and everything.
Anne-Marie, you probably don't realise this, but when we first met was at Andrew Erowiti's mining symposium. You had just heard that they were going to come back for another round and they were going to revise the application and go again.
When we got notification that they wanted to mine our seabeds, it was like, oh, that's crazy, why would you want to do that? As we started to understand just what was involved, it was like, oh, this is going to ruin our ocean. It's an operation that was going to affect the mammals out there, 24/7 for 35 years. I think the consent was for, and so it was just we couldn't believe it.
I certainly remember the second time that they came back, and just in terms of that submission, all of your concerns were exactly what we need to then say, okay, we've got the rules, you've got the facts, let's put them together. So we were able to use that and say, look, here's what the legislation says. This doesn't satisfy A and B because of this test here, and that doesn't satisfy that over there because of your concerns here. And I remember being able, it was only because of your clear statements about what your interests were and what were going to be affected. All that Haumoana gathering, all the kaitiakitanga that you've exercised, over generations. When you have those interests, we can say, okay, this is going to do X and Y and Z, and that's not going to meet that in terms of effect.
That's the first time that we've actually reached out to people in the university to help us. Yeah, and you know, it's really so valuable to have that kind of support. When we had that first hui here and came to ask what we should do about this application, our Uncle Joe, he said, I always remember the way he talked about it too, because he uses few words, but he said, the whales have always passed through here and they must always be allowed to pass through. That's what he said. And so that's something I feel really deeply and strongly about our big mammals, because in our culture, in the order of things, comes ranginui, papatūnuku, tangaroa, and everything else, and we're right down the end. And so we think of these big mammals like the whales as our tuakana, as our senior in the ocean world. So anything that's going to disrupt their lives is, that's really a transgression against nature. It's a transgression against the kawa, the order of things. When I think about the marine life that's out here, and when I think about the effect that mining will have on our marine life, honestly, it just, it just makes me literally bawl. We can't let it happen.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.